shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
On Monday, President Trump said he might reveal his Middle East peace plan before Israel's elections on September the 17th. He also announced that China had called to indicate they wanted to conclude a trade deal. As a result, U.S. stock markets shot up. Is there a method to Trump's madness? We'll talk about it today on this edition of End of the Age. Just out of the blue comes this announcement from President Trump. We may release the Middle East peace plan before Israeli elections. Now, President Trump is a master at dangling things out there and then taking them back and then bringing them back to keep everybody's attention riveted on what he would like for it to be. Well, that's exactly what it appears to be happening here. Now, President Donald Trump suggested Monday that his administration may release the much-anticipated Middle East peace plan dubbed the Deal of the Century before Israel's next Knesset election slated for September the 17th. Speaking at the G7 conference in Biarritz, France, President Trump said he may release the plan prior to Israel's 22nd Knesset election, which is set to be held just months after its 21st election this last April. On Monday, President Trump appeared ready to release the plan before Israel's second election of 2019. I think you may see what the deal is before the election, Trump said. The president also expressed optimism that the Palestinian Authority will return to the negotiating table despite the Palestinian Authority's vows not to accept the U.S.-backed peace plan. But I think a deal will happen. But everybody says that's a deal that can't be made. They always refer to that deal that way. Israel and the Palestinians. There's tremendous hatred for many, many decades. And everybody says that is a deal that can't be made. So we'll see if we can make it. Trump said that the Palestinian Authority would ultimately join U.S. brokered talks in order to receive funding from the U.S. Okay, now let's pause here just a minute. To really appreciate this article, you really need to have read President Trump's book called The Art of the Deal. Repeatedly throughout his years as a real estate broker and dealer, he was able to get deals done that people said could not be done, and yet he was able to get them done. Well, here we are again with the ultimate deal. Now, Trump says, I think we can make a deal. He went on to say in the article, I think the Palestinians would like to make a deal. As you know, I cut off most funding to the Palestinians, a lot of funding. And I think they'd like to get it back. I think they'd like to make a deal. We'll see what happens. Nobody has ever done that before. They used to negotiate paying a fortune of money, like $750 million a year. They'd pay and pay and pay, speaking about the United States government, and they'd be treated with disrespect. But they'd keep paying. This went on for years. So I don't believe in that, Trump said. We cut off their funding, a lot of it, and we'll see what happens. But I think they want to make a deal, the Palestinians. And I think Israel would like to make a deal too. Now, let's pause just a moment. We're talking about 2.5 years into his administration. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and his longtime lawyer, Jason Greenblatt, have been working on this deal for the last 2.5 years, and they now have a complete deal, both a financial deal and a political deal. They have it put together. The financial deal's already been released. The political deal is ready, and it's like Trump is just itching to make it happen and to reveal it to the world. So Trump is saying, I think we can get this done. So he's the president of the United States. From his perspective, he's saying, I think this can be done. The article continues to say the U.S. has already released the economic portion of its peace deal at a workshop in Bahrain in June. The political portion of the deal, however, remains a closely guarded secret, with only a handful of senior U.S. officials, including envoy Jason Greenblatt and White House advisor Jared Kushner, privy to the entire peace plan. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's just pause right here. Why do we care? Well, we care because one of the greatest prophecies in the entire Bible foretold this peace plan 2,500 years ago. And this prophecy states that when this plan is signed, it will mark the beginning of the final 7 years to the Battle of Armageddon and the physical return of Jesus to this earth. Now do you understand why we care and why we talk about it all the time?
As soon as you say end time, they say, whoa, the end of the world. When's it going to be? And you can see this mask of fear. I'm not telling you the end time is coming. I'm telling you, you live in it right now. Daniel chapter number 7, verse number 4. The first beast was like a lion. We have the eagle used continually to depict the United States of America. You see it on governmental documents. We are the generation for which these that you will not miss one segment of understanding the end time, because I've had many people tell me it's changed their life forever. Many of the major prophecies of the Bible are given to us 2, 3, some of them as high as 4 or 5 times. There is not any chance it's not going to happen, because it's in your Bible, it's prophesied, and the prophecies always come back.
I have another article. This article is from the Jerusalem Post, and it gives us another view of President Trump's expression when he said the deal of the century may be revealed before Israel elections. Now, this was the Jerusalem Post just today, the 26th of August. Here's what it says. The U.S. president's intention to publicize his peace plan before the Israeli elections is just and correct. That was stated by Blue and White number 2, Yair Lapid. He said that just today. The Israeli public has a right to know what to expect the day after the elections. A blue and white government will be a partner for anything that strengthens Israel's security and safeguards the country's interests. Now, the Blue and White Party is the party that hasn't been in power for a long time. However, they are running very close to the Likud party, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's party. As a matter of fact, the polls are saying they're within 1 or 2 Knesset seats of each other. Consequently, either one of these parties could end up putting a government together, or they could actually decide they have to form a national unity party. Because in the April elections, Netanyahu tried to put a government together, and he couldn't put together enough seats in the Knesset. Now, you got to have 60 plus 1. There's a total of 120 seats in the Knesset, and you've got to have a majority in order to put a government together. Well, nobody could in the April 9th election. So here we are approaching elections again. We only have less than a month to wait. September the 19th is when it's going to happen. When this vote's taken this time, nobody believes they can go back to elections for the third time. So somebody's going to have to compromise somewhere, because the polls are stating the same result's going to happen this time as last time. Well, so what could the answer be? The answer could be that the Likud party and the blue and white party could come together, even though they're running against each other adamantly right now. So that would leave the right-wing parties out in the cold. They're the ones that say, we'll not give up 1 inch of our promised land. But if Trump's deal provides for a Palestinian state, or at least Palestinian autonomy of some sort, then they would never agree to it. So if they were part of the governmental coalition and the government was on the brink of agreeing to it, they could threaten to withdraw from the government, which would cause the government to collapse, and it would block the peace agreement. Now, on the other hand, if the Likud party was in a unity government with the blue and white party is all for trading land for peace. So they could easily agree to Trump's deal, and they could go ahead and make it, and the United Right Party could do nothing about it. Well, that's where we are now. On the other hand, let's just say that Netanyahu won and was able to cobble together a coalition. Then he moves, Trump releases his peace plan, and Netanyahu decides he must accept it, and then his right-wing members say, oh, no, you're not going to do that. We're going to topple your government. Then the blue and white could come in and say, we will support you, Prime Minister Netanyahu. I do not know exactly how it's going to happen. All I know is, according to the Bible, there is going to be a peace agreement. It looks like the timing is right now. And let me say it again. And if they sign this peace agreement, let's say within the next 6 months, you and I will enter the final 7 years, the next 6 months. Now let's qualify that, because I get this question all the time. All right, what does the peace agreement have to provide for in order for it to be the one that's in the prophecies of the Bible? It's very simple. Number one, the Palestinians will have to have their own area, either a complete state or else an autonomous area where they're totally in charge and in authority. Number two, the Temple Mount would be placed under a sharing arrangement. Right now it's not shared. Muslims only can worship there and pray there. Number three, the sharing arrangement will provide for the Jews to build their temple on the Temple Mount. So if the agreement does those three things, it is the agreement in the Bible. And there's a real good chance that when Trump reveals his peace plan, either before September the 17th or shortly thereafter, you and I are going to be able to read it for ourselves. And we'll see exactly what is in it. What exciting times we're in. You say, so that's pretty dramatic. You're talking about something unprecedented in the history of the world. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the greatest prophetic fulfillment in the last 2,000 years. And I'm talking about a prophecy that states, when this happens, you're 7 years away from the second coming, the physical second coming of Jesus Christ to this earth. The Bible explicitly states, he will so come back in like manner as you have seen him go. The Bible even says where he's going to touch down. He's going to touch down on the Mount of Olives. just outside the eastern gate of Jerusalem. He's going to come right down on the Mount of Olives. What an incredible prophecy that is. So that's what we're dealing with. That makes it incredibly important. Maybe I should say eminently important. And then the next question is, are we ready for this? So are we ready for the final 7 years? Now, I've got to say to you again, and I know I've said this over and over, but I'm sorry, I can't help it. Now, President Trump also said on Monday he wanted to see a strong Iran and was not seeking regime change in Tehran, adding that the way Iranians were being forced to live was unacceptable. Now, we've got very tight sanctions against Iran. Trump is attempting to force Iran's leaders to the peace table to sign a new deal that will be ironclad against them ever attaining a nuclear weapon. And that's what this is all about. Iran is hurting right now. Now, they just had the G7 meeting the last 3 days in France. The head of France, President Macron, with President Trump's permission, invited a high official of Iran to come to the G7 meeting and to have some talks. Now, this person did not meet with President Trump personally, but it appears he must have met with some of our leaders there. I do not have that information for sure for you yet. But President Trump said he would be glad to meet with President Rouhani and try to work out something. He says that Iran is so poor right now that they're going to have a loan to continue on. And he said he would be willing to negotiate that loan for the U.S. to supply part of the money, for the international community to supply part of the money. And when the reporters asked, well, what do you hold for collateral? He said, it's easy, oil. He said, there's not any better collateral than oil. And he said, once the oil begins to move again for Iran, they could pay off this loan very quickly now. But Trump said, we must not have some kind of an empty agreement. It must be ironclad. It must ensure that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, period. Now, that's where that is right now. Now, talking to reporters at the summit of the 7 wealthiest nations of the world, Trump said he had not been surprised that France had invited Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif for talks on Sunday on the sidelines of the G7 gathering. So that's a little bit of what I was just saying to you. Now let's talk about the G7 for a moment. Once each year, the 7 wealthiest nations come together and they meet for 2 or 3 days. They talk things over. They talk about the financial status of the world, the political status of the world. The 7 members are the United States, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, Japan, and the United Kingdom. Those are your 7 members of the G7. Well, there was a lot of discussion while they were there. One of the pieces of discussion was trade negotiations between China and the United States, because that is causing the whole world to be volatile, the stock markets to fluctuate. Now, what's behind this? Well, the United States had been running a $500 billion trade deficit with China for many years. How long can you go on trading with someone, and every year they're taking $500 billion more from you than they gave back to you? You're becoming $500 poorer every single year. You either have to borrow it or you have to discover it from another source. The U.S. has been borrowing it all this time. President Trump said, we can't keep going on. He said this problem should have been solved by Barack Obama, or it should have been solved by George W. Bush, or it should have been solved by Bill Clinton, or it should have been solved by George Herbert Walker Bush. And obviously he's right. Anybody with any level of intelligence knows that that's a problem that has to be solved. But people have been conveniently ignoring it because they didn't want to produce a situation of pressure with China. But Trump does not ignore those things. He's a businessman. He knows you got to balance the books, or someday you're going to pay the piper. All right. So the reason we're having these negotiations right now is because Trump says we've got to change this permanently. We will not go on handing you $500 billion. We would rather find our clothing and our socks and everything else we buy from you elsewhere. Now, we can get them cheaper from China because their labor rates are so low. But President Trump, he's a businessman. All of his life, he understands this like the back of his hand. Consequently, he's not willing to compromise on this issue. Okay. Furthermore, he would like to have a trade deal with the European Union because America's been running a $150 billion deficit with the EU year after year after year. So we're losing $500 billion to China, $150 billion to the EU. No wonder our deficit is going up, up, up. And then of the EU deficit, $68 billion of that is to Germany. Now add on to that, Mexico is one of our biggest trading partners. We're running an $81 billion deficit yearly with Mexico. Add to that, we're running a $67 billion a year deficit with Canada. Now, I think I said that wrong. Let me back up just a moment. We're running a $67 billion a year with Japan, a deficit. We're running $20 billion a year to Canada. So look at all these deficits, and the only way we're dealing with it is by borrowing more money. President Obama doubled the national debt in 8 years. And so far, President Trump is just keeping on. He's got the gas on the floor. However, being the businessman that he is, surely he's going to try to turn that around and stop that continual indebtedness. You know, Ronald Reagan, the first couple of years of his presidency, he ran the debt up, and then all of a sudden, when his whole machine, really his economic machine kicked in, he was able to stop going in the red and start reversing the trend the other way. Hopefully, that's what President Trump has in mind to do. That's what he better have in mind to do. Okay, so President Trump wants a trade deal with the United Kingdom. They've just changed their prime ministers. Boris Johnson just became the new prime minister. He and President Trump met together at the G7 summit, talked about a trade deal. Since the United Kingdom is leaving the European Union in the deal called Brexit, we have to make a trade deal just between the UK and us. And also, President Trump said that he would be willing to meet with President Rouhani of Iran. So we've got all these huge international problems that President Trump is having to deal with. But he acts like he's unfazed. He acts like he's totally comfortable. He knows what's at stake, and he knows how to solve those problems. Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens between now and the election in 2020. Will China say, if we hold out and we don't get a deal with the U.S., will it mean the defeat of Trump in 2020? And if we do that, can we hold out? Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.